Man, kind of feels like a big movie trailer, doesn't it? I thought that was great. Before we get in, some of you guys want to know, maybe didn't know this. Our student pastor, Johnny, and his wife, Emily, she was pregnant, and they gave birth to baby Margot this week. So we're really excited about that. Absolutely. We're spiritual family. We walk through each other with hard things, and we also celebrate good things. You also know that there's a lot of people out there that are sick. Some of you are half sick already, so you may not see them for a little while, right? They want to kind of make sure everybody's healthy before they get here, but you'll see her soon, and we'll celebrate again. But we were excited about that. We are starting a brand new series called Witness, and if you follow us on social media, you already know this, and that is my shameless plug to invite you, if you don't, follow us on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and if you do, I'm going to ask you to take it one step further. If you actually see something you like, would you like it? Would you comment? Would you share it? Just to kind of let other people know some of the cool things that are going on at Mountain Ridge, because we love to profile the stories of people's lives, what's going on, events, activities, things you don't want to miss out on, things for your kids and your family. So great thing to do, easy thing to do. Just follow us on social media, and I think it'll help you out as you connect with us. And so, like I said, we're starting a brand new series. It's called Witness, and it probably doesn't take a genius to figure out it's about a guy who was a witness, a guy that saw some things. And this guy's name was John. And you may or may not know the biblical story, but John was one of the first followers of Jesus. And as he went through his life, he realized, I have seen some things that other people haven't seen. I've heard some things that other people haven't heard, and I need to write them down because people need to know who Jesus is and what he was about and what he did and why it matters. And John, if you remember this, which I know this is hard, if you go back to like junior high or high school or college, wherever you were, when you had to write an essay or a research paper or something like that, the stuff that everybody hated, when you had to do that, your paper usually had to have this thing called a thesis statement, right? Which is a fancy way of describing what's the point? Why are you writing this? What are you trying to accomplish? John actually wrote a thesis statement in his book. When he was writing everything he wrote, he said, here, there is a reason that I'm doing this. There's a big reason, actually. And he shares it with us. It's in John chapter 20, verse 31. I just want to read it to you real quick. John said this. He says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And here's the clinching part. Here's why he wrote what he did. And in his day and time, it was really hard to write stuff down and to save it and copy it. It wasn't like you'd sit down at a computer. I mean, there's a lot of work involved. That that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in his name, you might have life. That's why I did this. That's why I wrote all this down. And kind of let me put it in Brett terms. He's saying, look, I followed Jesus around for 3 years. He did a lot of stuff. He did a lot of stuff that made us scratch our heads. We saw things we never thought we would see. We heard him say stuff that we kind of like, what does that mean? I don't get it all. He said, I could have never written all of that down, but I picked out 7 things, and he calls them signs, which we might call them miracles or extraordinary things. He said, I picked out 7 signs that are there for you for a reason, that are going to give you a reason to believe that Jesus is different, that Jesus has something special going on. So he picks out these signs, and it's really different, isn't it, than the way we talk about faith? Because for a lot of us, and maybe you can take this outside of the church world too. Maybe if you go to church all the time, you hear these words, but maybe if you don't go to church all the time, you still hear people talk about belief. You got to believe, right? And sometimes people say you got to have faith. I remember when I went to high school, this was back in the days, you'd get the big yearbook, and people would sign it and everything. I probably had a dozen people sign in my yearbook, keep the faith. In what? What does that even mean? I mean, but we talk about it like, well, you just got to have faith. And somebody's going through a hard time. Sometimes we'll try to encourage them as this, well, you just got to have more faith. In what? Why? Is it just kind of a hope that things will be better? Is it just kind of a naiveness that says, well, it's America and we're, everything's great and things are going to be better in the future? I mean, that's what a lot of us think of when it comes to faith. As a matter of fact, a lot of people have actually left the church over that. You think, well, what do you mean? they didn't start that way, and they didn't mean anything by it. And let me say this, they're not bad people. But here's what happened. They were go-along people, right? And you know what I mean? Like, so maybe you were married to somebody and they were really interested in church and it was really important to them. And so it didn't really do much for you, but you just kind of went along, because I want to support my wife or my husband or whatever. I'm just going along. Or maybe the other way around. Maybe it was your kids were really super interested in church and they really loved it and it seemed like it was really important. And so as a good parent, the church thing's not really for me, but I'm going to go along because, my kids care about it. Or maybe growing up as a kid, your parents were really involved in church and faith and Jesus and all this stuff. And it seemed like, they made you come, whether you wanted to or not. You just went along because you didn't have any choice. Just going along. And there's nothing wrong with people that go along. As a matter of fact, the failure isn't necessarily on the part of the go along people. The failure is on the part of the rest of us that never gave them a reason to believe. Because what happens is you go along until you have a reason not to go along anymore. Until the situation changes. Circumstances are different. I don't need to go along anymore, so I don't go along anymore. And John, the way he writes about faith, is so different than that. John says, no. We don't believe for the sake of belief. We don't have faith or keep the faith just because we should or just have this naive hope. No. For John, the reason you believed, he said, because I saw things that made a difference. I experienced things in some ways that I couldn't explain, but I also realized those things had meaning. Those things had purpose way beyond what happened in the moment. John said, no, the reason for faith, the reason to believe is not because of good feelings or nice thoughts. And not certainly because I'm just going along. For John, for the rest of the early followers of Jesus, the reason they believed is because of what they had seen. They had evidence. It made a difference for them. And John calls them signs. Like I said, we may think of them as miracles or extraordinary things or something like this, but John says they're signs. And I think he picked that word for a very important reason. And I want to kind of give you Brett's interpretation of this, because sometimes we get confused about the sign and what the sign points to, right? And there's a difference there. A sign is not the point. What the sign points to is the point, right? And so let me give a perfect example. If you've ever done the idea of driving your family to Disneyland, right? You get in the car, you go get breakfast and everybody starts out happy. That lasts for about half an hour. And then you got another 6 hours before you get there. And you're on your way and you see that big green board with the metal poles and it says Disneyland 20 miles. And all of a sudden everybody's excited. All right, we're almost there. It's only 20 more minutes. Nobody gets excited about the big green board, right? The sign is not the point. What the point is that in 20 minutes, we're going to be at Disneyland. Right? Everybody's excited. The family's excited. Everything's going well. And then once it's finally over and you're driving home, mom and dad get excited when they see the sign that says home is only 45 more minutes. I'm poor. I'm tired. I hate my kids and I hate everybody at Disneyland, but I am almost home. You're excited about what the sign points to. I'm home. Not the fact that there's a sign. And John says, don't make a mistake. Don't get focused on the sign. You got to pay attention to what the sign points to. Because for John, he said, I saw these signs. And you know what they pointed to? They pointed to reasons to believe in Jesus and find life in his name. So we're going to be in John chapter 2. If you've got a Bible or you like to follow along in the app, John chapter 2, where we're going to get started. But as you're kind of making your way there, I want to share with you just one other quick little heads up. If you're kind of new to the Jesus thing, you're just kind of checking it out. This series is perfect for you because what we want to do is help you understand there's reasons for you to trust in Jesus. It isn't just a leap of faith. There's more to it than that. And if you're on the other side, you're almost checking out. You've been a go-along person, right? I've kind of gone along for a while. The world's starting to change. Let me tell you, this series is for you because this is going to give you more of a reason than just going along to believe. And if you're a passionate follower of Jesus, you're excited about what God's doing in your life. You're excited about what he's doing in the lives of the people around you and in your family. This series is for you too. Because not only is this going to give you reason to believe, it is going to fuel your belief and give you a level of confidence maybe that you've never even had before when it comes to belief. So let's look at the first sign in John chapter 2, verse 1. And we're in a little town called Cana. And you don't need to know a whole lot about Cana other than the fact that it's a little town. I mean, it's a very small little village and Jesus and his guys are there. So let's kind of jump in and see what's going on. It says this, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. And Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. And when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. Okay, stop there for a second. You may kind of like, what? Wait a minute. We were getting all ready to have evidence and signs, and now Jesus and these guys are going to a wedding. What's happening here? Okay, Cana was a small town, and it was nearby where Jesus had grown up. And one of the things that you may know already, weddings in Jesus' day and time were a big deal. I mean, big deal. Like sometimes in some cases for wealthier people, they would go on for 7 days. I mean, you think the wedding is hard now, right? You think it's expensive now. How about a 7-day wedding? And in a small town like Cana, not just for your friends and family, everybody that lived in town, right? This was a community event. And so this was a massive, massive undertaking. Jesus was invited. Jesus' mother, Mary, you know Mary, the one that had the baby in the stable, the mother of God, you know, virgin birth, you know Mary. Mary's there. Jesus is there, and Jesus' guys come with him, and the whole town is there. They're getting ready to have this wedding, and somewhere in the middle of it, we don't know exactly. Let's say it's the third day. It could be the third day of the week, or it could be in the third day of the wedding. Somewhere in there, somebody looks around and goes, we're running out of wine. I mean, and for the wedding people, wine was pretty important. We're running out of wine. And you got to understand, in a small town like this, some of you grew up in small towns, some of you have lived in small towns, you know that once something bad happens, that story stays with that family forever, right? I mean, you know that the way this would go down is years from now, they would be talking about, you remember the Johnson wedding? Oh yeah, that's the one where they ran out of wine, the morons. I mean, they knew everybody was coming. They knew we were supposed to have wine. They were the ones that ran out of wine. And that's how they would be known forever. Oh, the Johnsons? Oh yeah, the ones that don't have the wine? Yeah, I know them. I mean, that's how they would be known forever. And Mary somehow is connected to this family. Because like for you and me, we go somewhere and they run out of stuff. You're just kind of like, oh, that stinks. Let's go to Chipotle. You know, I mean, we just move on. But she felt compelled. No, we got to do something about this. This is my problem. I don't know if she was family or friends or what was going on. But Mary, Jesus's mom, realizes that they're running out. And she says, we have to do something. Look at verse 4. It says this. She came, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. Jesus' answer, he says, woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Now, you got to stop here. To me, this is funny. And so you hopefully you agree with me. Otherwise, it'll be a long sermon. But he's standing there and she says, looking at Jesus. I mean, you got to picture this in your mind. Mom's talking to her son, you know, and I gave birth to you 30 years ago and I've raised you and, you know, I'm your mother. And hey, Jesus, they're out of wine. And he goes, woman, you know, not that woman, right? Like, woman, what's the matter with you? No. It was a different address. It was dear lady. Now, it was odd for an adult Jewish boy to refer to his mom this way. So there's something going on here. Jesus is trying to get her attention. He didn't just call her mom. He said, dear lady. In essence, what does that have to do with me? Why are you dragging me into this, that they're out of wine at the wedding? And I think for Mary, it was kind of one of those moments. Like I said, she was there when he was born. She saw all the unique and special things that happened at his birth. She heard all the stories that had been told about him. She saw the wise men came. She raised him. She saw that he was different. There was something about him. And I think in her mind, it was kind of like, this is the chance for the world to know that my special, delicious little boy is special. You know, you got to see who he is. And Jesus, this is your moment. Man, you could do something here and everybody would go, ooh and ah, and they would know how great you are. And Jesus is still kind of, you know, I came to save the world, not weddings. And Mary's just like, the reason I think it's funny is just like my mom. She just kind of dropped a little mom card and a little mom guilt on him. She kind of looks at the servants and she's like, well, do whatever he says. And she walks off and she's like, because I know you're going to do it because mom told you to do it. And you're a good boy. And so she walks away. And before that goes too far, don't miss what happened right there. You see, she knew she could count on him. She brought her everyday kind of what a lot of people would say silly, simple concerns to Jesus. And she knew that she could not only bring them to him, that she could leave them with him. And she was confident in the fact that he loved her. And you can do the exact same thing. Because some of you today are sitting here struggling with kind of maybe simple, maybe common, maybe everyday concerns. And hear me very, very closely. You can bring your everyday concerns and problems to Jesus, and you can leave them with him. And you can be confident in his love, that he is not going to blow it off. He is not going to ignore it. And if it matters to you, it matters to him. Now, I will say, and we're about to see, he may not deal with it the way you expect him to, all right? And he may not deal with it in the timeline that you would like him to. But you can bring whatever's going on in your heart, whatever struggles you're carrying, whatever burdens that you feel like are weighing you down. You can bring them to Jesus and you can leave them with him, and you can be confident in the fact that he loves you and that he will take action. And that's exactly what Mary did. And so now we see the sign. Look at verse 6. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." And they did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside. And he said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you saved the best until now." So somehow, and we'll talk about this, somehow Jesus turns water into wine. And I thought, that's kind of odd, but I realized as I was looking around online, it actually happened the other day. I found this on the internet, that this has happened again. And so let me put a picture up here. We've got a little water cooler that got filled with wine, #Jesus. Are we allowed to laugh at wine in church? Yes, you are. And I'm kind of thinking to myself that when the husband or the wife came home and saw that, he's like, "What happened?" The other response was probably like, "Jesus, he did it again. Turned it all into wine." That's what Jesus does. He turns stuff into wine. Turn it into wine. He used these big clay pots. Now, this one's about 20 gallons worth. So 20 to 30, it's going to be this big or a little bit bigger. You might think, well, what's with all the pots? Why do they have the pots? Why do you have a pot on stage? What's so big deal about the pots? Now, the pots were a part of the Jewish religious system, okay? What they would do is they would have pots like this all over the place, and they would have them filled with water. And the reason was, as every good Jewish person knew, you need to wash. Now, we think, it's hygiene. No, hygiene's a nice benefit, but that wasn't the reason. They had to wash when they went outside. They washed when they came back in. They washed when they went to the temple. They washed when they went to a party. They washed before they ate. They washed all the time. Why? What's going on? What's behind this? It was actually very simple. They knew that to be clean, to be right with God, that they couldn't do it on their own. And so they would wash as kind of a symbolic thing that I am washing myself because I want to be connected to God. I know that I'm not pure in and of myself. So I'm washing my hands. But what I'm really admitting is that, God, I want to be right with you, but I also understand that I can't be right with you all by myself, that I need something to intervene on my behalf. And so this idea of washing was really twofold. It always locked in their brain two things, that I have to be pure to connect with God, and something else has to make me pure. I can't do it by myself. Now, unfortunately, for a lot of Jewish people, and we'd be in the same boat, right? If you're washing your hands 5, 6, 8, 10 times a day, pretty soon it just becomes habit, right? You just do it because you're supposed to. You don't necessarily think through the whole process. And that's what had been happening. That was the old way. That was the tradition. That was the ritual. That's what you did. You washed your hands because you're supposed to. And if you bothered to stop and think about it, and again, just like you and I do, we get habits in our lives. If you bother to stop and think about it, a lot of times the reason that habit started, it was a good idea. But eventually it just becomes a habit. And so for these Jewish people, they had these pots here. And Jesus says, I want you to take these pots that are part of the old system, these pots that people aren't really paying attention to anymore, and I want to do something new with them. I want you to fill them up with water. And he did. And if you do the math, what ends up happening is it's about 150 gallons, which if you're a big wine person, you would probably know that's about 2,500 glasses of wine. This is a lot of wine, right? He goes, I want you to fill it up and I want you to take it to the caterer. Let him taste it. So they do. They fill it up. They take it to the caterer. And somehow when they originally had 150 gallons of water, now they have 150 gallons of wine. And the caterer tastes it and he goes, wow, this is good. He goes, you guys got it backwards. At the beginning of the wedding, when everybody's still sober, that's when you serve the good stuff. Once they get a little tipsy, that's when you can bring out the watered down stuff that nobody really wants, right? Because he knew what we all knew. Everybody that goes to a wedding is a wine enthusiast. You know the rest of it, right? The more wine they drink, the more enthusiastic they become. And he knew that. And he's like, why did you bring out the good stuff now? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? And nobody else knew what had happened. Jesus knew. His disciples knew. The servants probably had some idea. The host had no idea. And the rest of the people at the wedding, they're just drinking wine. They're not even thinking about it. And so all this is going on in the background. Jesus says, I want to take something old, something that's based in tradition, something that people aren't even thinking about anymore. I want to do something new. And not only do I want to do something new, I'm going to give you a lot more than you need, and I'm going to give you a lot better than you need. That what I'm doing here is actually much, much more significant than water and wine. And we see that in the very next verse. Look at verse 11. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which, this is how John puts it, this sign, this changing water into wine. Here's what John says about it. Here's where John says this is significant. He revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. You see, the disciples up into that point, they were just going along. I mean, Jesus had made them feel included. Jesus had something about him that they wanted to be around him, but they didn't believe yet. They didn't know yet. They were just going along. And all of a sudden, John says, when he did this, we had reason to believe. I mean, before we thought he was a good guy. Before we thought it was kind of interesting what he was doing. And you got to understand the context here. There's probably only about 5 or 6 disciples right now. If you know some of the Bible stories, you know there's 12 of them, and then eventually there's hundreds of them. But there's only about 5 or 6 right now. And to be honest, most of them, based on the timeline, is a little bit foggy, but it's around 7 days that they've been following him. They're new. And now they see something that would have gotten anybody's attention. And John says it's a sign. And not only is it a sign, it's a reason to believe. We saw God's glory, and our response was to believe in him. And I would say something to you as well. If you're kind of new to this whole thing, you've just been coming to church for a little while, or maybe you've just been here at Mountain Ridge for a couple of times. As soon as you see evidence, it's okay to believe. Don't set up this big, huge hurdle that God has to get over. See, for these guys, they weren't expecting anything that day to happen at the wedding. But they went to the wedding and something happened. And for them, it was reason to believe. Yeah, we've only been following you for maybe a very few days. Yeah, there's only a couple, 5, 6 of us or whatever. But we saw something. And we realized what we saw was bigger than what we saw. And it pointed to something else. Because of that, we believe. So even if you've just been coming a few days, checking out this Jesus thing, even if you're not sure if anybody's on your side, you're worried about, well, what about other people? What are they going to say? What are they going to think? Like I said, people at the wedding had no idea. The host didn't know what was going on. The servants were confused. But the 5 that were willing to look at it realized there's a reason here to believe. And for John anyway, he said, what I saw was enough reason for me to believe in Jesus that I might have new life. So it's a pretty amazing story. And I think it's easy to kind of get lost on the sign thing like we talked about. What is a sign and what does a sign point to and all that other stuff? Because when you think about the story, there's this kind of cool vibe of, how did he do that? How did the water turn into wine? Was it like when they dipped out the cup? Was it while they carried it? Was it when the guy first take the drink? Then did it turn? When did that happen? How did that happen? We don't know. And there's also kind of the cool thing that I like anyway about Jesus saving this couple from a lifetime of embarrassment, saving this family from having the shame of, oh yeah, you're the guys who ran out of the wine, which that's pretty cool too. And there's this, quirky, funky interaction between Jesus and his mom. And it reminds us, right, that Jesus was in a family just like you are. Jesus negotiated family relationships just like you do. And so all those things are pretty cool. But I think the big takeaway for me anyway is the pot. And maybe it is for you too. You see, the pot was just a common, ordinary, regular thing that was intensely practical and almost unnoticeable. And for a lot of us, that's what our lives are like, right? I'm not saying that our lives don't matter, they're common or simple or anything like that. But what I am saying is our lives, most of our lives, our days look pretty much the same, don't they? Tomorrow's Monday, and that's going to look a lot like last Monday looked. And that's probably going to look a lot like next Monday is going to look. And your Tuesdays are the same, and your Wednesdays are the same, and your weeks are the same, and your months are the same. I mean, there are moments, there are events, but for the most part, every day is kind of like the last day and the next day. And again, most of what you do is super, super practical. Now, you do have to make some big decisions here and there, right? I mean, you do, relationships and choices and decisions and things like that. But most of the decisions you make, they're pretty ordinary. Where are we going to go eat? Who's picking up the kid? What are we doing this weekend? I mean, we're just making normal, practical, everyday kind of decisions. And so in a lot of ways, our lives are like the pot. And the pot represents the old ways. Like I talked about for the Jewish people, it was, hey, we gotta be right with God. We gotta wash. We got this system. We got these rituals. We got this tradition. That's how we connect with God. But for us, a lot of times the old way is, I just want to be a good person, right? I just want to be a nice guy. I want to be a good citizen. I'm going to go to church on important days and I'm going to go along with friends or family if they invite me. And, I'm just going to try to do the right thing. Try to be a good guy, because what I'm thinking is ultimately one day, someday, I can somehow kind of tilt the scales in my favor and get God on my side because, he sees that I'm trying. He sees that, I'm trying to be a good person. And that for a lot of us, that's the old way. We think that's how we're going to connect with God. And the truth of it is our old way doesn't work any better than the Jewish people's old way. It doesn't really work at all, to be honest with you. And then Jesus comes along and he does this sign, which I admit is totally cool and quirky. And I don't know how he did it. But John says it points to something. It points to something. Especially if you're not a follower of Jesus, it points to something where I think Jesus is almost saying, look, if you like what I can do with water, wine, and pots, wait till you see what I can do with your life. I mean, I want to offer you a new you and an improved you. I mean, you thought we did something new. You thought the wine was better than the old. That's true. That's great. But really, you got to understand the bigger picture. The point of all of this is I can give you new life. And John said, when I saw that, it was evidence for me. It was evidence for the other guys. And I'm writing it down because I think it can be evidence for you. That Jesus wants to do something new in your life. He wants to do something better in your life. He's offering that to you. Now, if you are a follower of Jesus already, you might hear that and you think, well, that's great. But I'm already on the team. I'm on the bus. I got it. A man named Paul wrote about us. And instead of a clay pot, he said it was jars of clay. And in 2 Corinthians 4:7, he said, we have this treasure in jars of clay. Man, our lives may look a lot like everybody else's on the outside. They may not be all that different. And my days kind of run together and my life is pretty ultimately practical and everything. And some of you maybe are rock stars and you live a whole different life than the rest of us. But most of us, I kind of got an ordinary day and an ordinary life and an ordinary situation. And Paul says, but if you're a follower of Jesus, you have this treasure in jars of clay. And it's a testament to God's all-surpassing power because it's him and not us. And what happens is it changes us because we found that reason to believe, because we've locked onto something that we said, you know what, there is evidence to this. This is not wishes and fairy tales. I believe. And because I believe, it's changed the things that I value. I used to see the world one way. I used to see other people one way. But because of what I believe about Jesus and because of what he's done and brought into my life, I realize that my values have changed. And because my values have changed, the way I think has changed. When I used to think about getting even, now I think about forgiving. When I used to think about how to get ahead and be first, now I think about putting somebody else first. When I used to think about how this was going to affect me and what I need and what I want and how everything revolves around me, now I'm starting to think about how do I love other people? And when what I believe changes, what I value changes, what I think changes, sooner or later, then my behavior changes. It's not about rituals and rules and checking boxes. It's about belief that changes us. And because we have this new life, we end up with a new lifestyle. And all of a sudden, the things we've been talking about before, this idea of what is my life about? Loving God with everything I have and loving my neighbors, myself, all of a sudden that makes sense. Because I believe, and I believe because I have a reason to believe. Because outside of that, let's be honest, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's tied to your belief. And so if you're not a follower of Jesus, man, there's hope for you. If you are a follower of Jesus, hopefully this is wind in your sails. But if you're a go-along guy, a go-along girl, you've just been kind of going along. And like I said, I'm not condemning you for that at all. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're going along. Don't miss next week because we're going to talk about the second sign and the idea of would you rather repair something or would you rather replace it? So I hope you'll be here for episode 2 of Witness. Let's pray together.